So you are welcome back to class, and today we will be talking about the Daily Scrum, which is the second event of the 353 of Scrum, talking about the 5 events in Scrum. In the last class, we looked at the sprint planning, which is also an event. In actual sense, a meeting where the work that needs to be done in the course of the sprint. Remember again, the sprint is a duration where work is carried out. So the work that needs to be done in the course of the sprints is planned. So let's move over and right into the Daily Scrum. What is the Daily Scrum? Let's take a quick look at this picture. We will see the sprint backlog. In the last class, I guess I showed us, this is back to the board. I'm back to the board now. In the last class where we were doing the sprint planning, I told us that the backlog here under Jira is the same as the product backlog. The product backlog, that's making reference to the third, or rather the second three in the 353 of Scrum, talking about the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the product increments. So the ones here, all these items here are inside the product backlog. However, the sprint items is what we make reference to as the sprint backlog. Let me take that again. The items in a sprint, as we can see here, these items is what we call the sprint backlog. So this is the sprint backlog, and these are the items in the sprint backlog. So from the product backlog, some work items move into the sprint. I explained this in the last class. And the sprint is started. And that is what brings us back to this board here. I just want us to have that quickly added to it. So that's the sprint backlog we have here. So the sprint backlog here is the same as what we have here. So this is our active sprint. This is an active sprint. And the backlog for the sprints are what we have here under the backlog. So when we look at this picture again, we will see 3 noticeable columns. The to-do column, the doing column, and the done column. The to-do, which stands for work that needs to be done. The doing column, which represents work that has started, that is currently being worked on, and the done column, which signifies work that has been concluded. That is exactly what the sprint backlog focuses on. Mind you, I said what the sprint backlog focuses on, not what the daily stand-up is about. I'm just laying the foundation for the Daily Scrum, otherwise called Daily Stand-Up. So let's go next to the next screen. Okay, before I go next before I move over to the next slide, we can see the team members converging around the board. So this is a board. Before COVID happened, work was mostly carried out in offices where teams are co-located. Please mind the use of my words. Those are the relative terms or terminology or language that is expected of you to relate with. So before COVID happened, everyone or mostly everyone worked in the office or at places of work. So as at that time, there was a physical board that team members stack up work items led by the product owner on the board, and the daily scrum or daily stand-up, which I mentioned earlier, is a 15-minute meeting every workday. Mind you, every workday is a 15-minute meeting every workday. So before COVID happened, every team member would converge by the board and they would literally stand up. That was where the name stand up came from. And the essence of the stand up is so that the meeting will be limited to just 15 minutes. A daily stand up or daily scrum, because we're talking about Scrum framework, is not expected to last longer than 15 minutes. Of course, when you get to the field, you could make something different, and that is why you would be the Scrum Master or the product owner, ensuring that the team keeps it at 15 minutes. So the idea is that everyone stands up around the board and discuss work that needs to be done. That is where the word daily stand-up came from. So what is to be discussed? There are 3 narratives that discussions in daily stand-up revolve around. 3 narratives discussions in daily stand-up revolve around. Before I go into that, the sprint itself must have a goal. I mentioned that also in the last class, that while the team is having a sprint planning session, they should come up with a sprint goal. It's expected to be a goal, but on the field you could have different goals when there are different reasons for it. So there is always a sprint goal, and this is how the sprint goal comes to play. So your discussion on the sprint at the daily stand-up is expected to focus squarely on the sprint goal. What are we doing towards the sprint goal? How are we achieving the objective of the sprint goal? I made mention earlier that there are 3 narratives. The first one has to do with what was done yesterday, or what did you do yesterday. Different Scrum Masters or leaders or narrator or facilitators could coin it as it could suit the team or not make it boring to the team. But the first one is, what did you do yesterday? However, that question, what did you do yesterday, is what did you do as related to the sprint goal. Every conversation should focus on the goal that the team is working towards at the end of the sprint. What was done yesterday? Second thing, or second thought or question, is what are you doing today? So each member takes turn to walk around what was done yesterday, what would be done today, and the third one, if there are any blockers or any problem or any impediments that needs to be resolved. That is what the Daily Scrum is all about. Let's say a few more things. So the first one objectives for the daily scrum is always synchronize and align development towards what the stakeholders want. So it's an inspective and adaptive meeting at every work day towards the goal designed by the stakeholder as the product owner represents. 2, it brings work transparency and it fosters team collaboration. The team members are able to come together in that 15 minutes meeting, and everybody knows what every other person is working on. So it brings transparency to the whole team members, and at the same time they are able to support themselves and collaborate with themselves. At the daily stand-up meeting, there would be cases where a particular team member could have an issue and say, oh, while I was working yesterday, I had a particular challenge with a piece of work, and another team member has some suggestions on how to solve it. So the person could come up and say, oh, have you tried these steps? Or I could catch up with you after this meeting to give you some support. So the daily stand-up helps the team to work together, bringing transparency to work, and it also serves as quick problem identification and resolution. I mentioned the 3 focus of the daily stand-up. What was done yesterday, what are we doing today, and if there are any problems. So it's a reflection meeting, narrowing down on any problem that needs to be resolved. When we get to the next module, for those that will be taking the Scrum Master training, we'll now dig deeper on what the role of the Scrum Master, or what the roles the Scrum Master has at these various events. Also, I mentioned earlier that the daily stand-up is a team meeting. All members of the team would come together to meet for 15 minutes. Let me quickly add this. The daily stand-up meeting is not a technical meeting. It's a process meeting. You need to ensure as a Scrum Master that it is not a meeting focused on technical details, but a reflective meeting to know what the status is and where we need help so that we could support them as needed. So it's also adapting sprint backlog as needed. I mentioned that earlier, that it's an inspective and adaptive meeting. I've mentioned earlier also that it's a 15-minute time-boxed meeting. And of course, it works. It is for every work day. A daily stand-up should happen at every work day. So that's what the daily stand-up is all about. Before we move on next, let's go back to the board so we can all see how all this come to play. So we're back to the board. This is the backlog from where we stopped on the sprint planning, and we assume we've started a new sprint. I said in the last class that I was going to explain this column. We would see from this last picture the 3 essential columns in the sprints that you can always find on the board. The to-do column, the in progress column, and the done column. Every board would have something similar. It could be called something different. on another project board, it may be called something different basically. But just have it in mind that we have the to-do column, meaning those work that needs to be done. The in progress column, those work you have started that you are working on. Then the done column that signifies what had been completed. You see these three other columns, they were created as needed. The first one of those three is the blocker column. Then the review column, then also the accepted column. Let me walk through these 6 columns with us. So at the start of the sprint, we'll see all our new work on the to-do column. Where a team carries over some task from the previous sprint, which is not always advised, but is often practiced on the field, but it's not the best practice. We would see other stories or other work items on different other columns. Meaning, when you close out an old sprint, you have an option to move it to a new sprint. And when you populate the new board, that is an active sprint, the work items would be reproduced at the columns they were before. So take for instance, this item was under the blocker, and we close this sprint out. It's end of sprint and we close it out. Everything moves. We have an option to move it to the future sprint or back to the backlog or wherever we want to move it to. When we start a new sprint, this column would reappear on the blocker column. I hope that is taken. So wherever each of the work item, this work item on the board, we could call it ticket. Sometimes we could call it card, C-A-R-D. Sometimes just know that they would be populated back to where they were. So we have the to-do column. I've explained this to these 3. So the blocker column is designed as needed to add any work item that has a problem, that has a challenge or an impediment. You add it to the blocker so it becomes visible. All these steps that I'm taking, they are being documented on Jira from time to time, and I will show that to us in a moment. So where you have a challenge, you move it to the blocker. And in practice, what is expected of you to do is also to add a comment to that story or to that ticket as an update of what the issue is or what you need to be resolved, or call anyone's attention to it. So let me demonstrate that for the sake of this class. So I could decide to tag someone. Let's tag I think we should be able to tag the Agile coach. I'm not sure who is a member of this team. Let's check. One moment, please. Okay, let's use enroute X. Good. So I've just tagged enroute X. Please have a check on this challenge, and I could deliberately add a challenge. Plumber failed to resume to work today. So this is a reason given to it. I actually just formulated something as an example for us and save it. What this does is when you tag someone, an email is generated and sent to that individual's email address, that there is an issue for him to look at and resolve. So this is how the board brings transparency and inspective process to ways of working. Mind you, I have moved this particular ticket or card at different times. I made reference to it earlier that any step you make is being documented. If we look here, we see we have history. If I click on this history, we would see all the changes that had happened to that particular ticket from the first day it was created, by whom that was created the issue. I told you in the last class, issue represents task in Jira. Was created on July 19, 2023, given the time. When it changed the parent, when it got updated into a sprint, and on, even to the actions I took just recently. You can see 3 minutes, change status from review to blocker, change status from blocker to review, from in progress to blocker, in that order. So everything is documented. And that is how work transparency is brought to work. So let's now go back to the daily stand-up. So when we come to the daily stand-up, the facilitator of the daily stand-up, before we go further, I need to add this also. According to Scrum ways of working, the product owner is not a mandated member of the daily stand-up. It doesn't mean that the product owner could not come to daily stand-up. The product owner has the free will to come to the daily stand-up. The daily stand-up is a meeting for the development team themselves to work amongst themselves. The Scrum Master is needed on the daily stand-up because he's supporting them when there are issues. It could be escalated to him. It could take it up and find the needed solutions for the developers. But for the product owner, it is not mandatory. However, on the field, you see most product owners attend daily stand-up, which is good. But you must also ensure that the daily stand-up is not hijacked and turned into a technical meeting. It is a process, is an agile Scrum process meeting where we understand what was done yesterday, what are we doing today, and quickly have a clear understanding when there are issues and what needs to be done. So the facilitator, it comes in different rounds. A team could decide that each person takes turn to facilitate the meeting, or another team could decide that when one person speaks and talks about what he was able to do yesterday towards the sprint goal, what is looking forward to accomplishing today towards the sprint goal, and if he has any problem or not, he could then pass that token to another person who takes the next turn to share. That's the second model that daily stand-up takes place. Or sometimes, or mostly, the Scrum Master could be the main facilitator of the daily stand-up. However, rules you must keep to mind when facilitating a daily stand-up is all your conversations must be around the board, this board. So The first thing a Scrum Master does when daily stand-up is to start is to open the board. You cannot be talking outside the board. You must keep your conversations around the board. Please note that any daily stand-up that is not having conversations around the board, I showed us earlier that is the essence of calling it stand up, and they stand to the board. So where a daily stand-up is not having a visual, the board, it is called anti-pattern. So by the time we get to the practicals, again for those who will go through practicals, you would then see how daily stand-up is carried out properly. All what I've mentioned is what you need to observe. The Scrum Master needs to ensure that those are observed during the daily stand-up. So in a nutshell, what the daily stand-up is for is to ensure that we have quick conversation under 15 minutes around the progress of work. It's a meeting, a Scrum event that is for the developers themselves. The product owner is not mandated to be there, though most product owners attend daily stand-up. The Scrum Master should be there because he's supporting the teams or the team members and ensuring that they have value from all their conversations. It must be kept under 15 minutes. It must be kept under 15 minutes. It must be focused on the work items that needs to be done, what have been done, and not technical meetings or technical details. Thank you. So that will be the end of this class. We see again in the next class. If you have any questions, please note them down and send it across. See you soon.